Vatican, a novel by Malachi Martin. In the war-torn spring of 1945, a young American monsignor, Richard Cooper Lansing, arrives in Rome to begin his Roman stint. 24 years old, tall and with an earnest, well-tanned face, Lansing has been sent from Chicago by his powerful mentor, Cardinal Kremenetz, to learn the intricate ways of the Vatican before eventually returning to lead the archdiocese. The city, scarred by the recent conflict and under Allied occupation, is a stark contrast to the majestic and seemingly eternal peace of the Vatican that greets him. On his very first morning, as he is dropped off in St. Peter's Square, his path unknowingly crosses with several figures who will shape his destiny: an elegant, blue-eyed young man in a black limousine, and a small, severe-looking cleric with piercing eyes who hurries into the Secretariat of State. Lansing is guided through the initial formalities by the tiny, ever-smiling doorman, Amedeo Salamondo, and the perpetually mournful-faced Monsignor Pasquinelli. He is soon brought before Archbishop Aldo Morandi, a kindly, pug-nosed man who was one of the two heads of the Secretariat of State. Morandi explains that Lansing will be assigned to the work of St. Raphael, a Vatican organization dedicated to helping the millions of refugees and displaced persons uprooted by the war. Lansing also meets the other head of the Secretariat, the formidable Archbishop Giovanni da Brescia, the same severe cleric from the Piazza, whose ambition and steely gaze are palpable even in a brief meeting. This Vatican Lansing enters is governed by the shrewd and aging Pope Eugenio Profumi. A gaunt, long-boned man with a patrician Roman nose and an air of unshakable authority, Profumi is a master of diplomacy and a fervent believer in the Roman fact, the divine mandate for the Bishop of Rome to rule the universal Church. However, the Pope is wrestling with a profound crisis of faith in his own institution. He fears that the Vatican's deep immersion in the godless politics and finance of the world is corrupting its spiritual mission. He anxiously awaits a sign from God to guide him as the world teeters on the brink of a new, and he fears more spiritually dangerous, post-war era. At the center of the Pope's immediate worries is a mission he has entrusted to his most valued lay collaborator, Maestro Guido della Valle. A tall, silver-haired man of immense personal wealth and power, della Valle is the hereditary keeper of the bargain, a secret centuries-old pact that underpins the Vatican's financial might. The maestro has been sent north to rescue the captured Italian dictator Benito Mussolini. The Pope believes that Mussolini, alive and in Vatican sanctuary, could be a valuable pawn to temper the Allies' demand for unconditional surrender and to prevent Italy from collapsing into communist chaos. The mission, however, ends in horror. Della Valle finds Mussolini, but the dictator refuses the Pope's offer of sanctuary. Instead, the maestro, in a desperate bid to retrieve valuable state papers and fascist gold for the Holy See, makes a deal with a communist partisan leader known as Colonel Valerio. The deal is a brutal deception. Della Valle witnesses the cold-blooded execution of Mussolini and his mistress, Clara Petacci, and then watches in revulsion as their bodies, along with those of their aides, are hung upside down in Milan's Piazza Loreto, to be desecrated by a frenzied mob. The event is a human blasphemy, confirming all Pope Profumi's darkest fears about the evil unleashed by the war. Della Valle returns to Rome shaken, his soul scarred by the violence he has countenanced. The Pope sees the failure of the mission as a terrible omen. Lansing, meanwhile, is thrown into the heart-wrenching work of the St. Raphael section, dealing daily with an endless stream of human misery. The sheer scale of suffering, of families torn apart, of lives shattered by violence and exile, profoundly affects him, stripping away his naive American view of the Church and the world. His life in Rome begins to take on a more defined shape. He acquires a quintessential Roman valet, the impeccably efficient Vittorio Benfatti, who manages every detail of his life and serves as an invaluable conduit of Vatican news and gossip. More importantly, he forms a deep and immediate friendship with Helmut della Valle, Maestro Guido's handsome, charming, and brilliant nephew, who holds a high position in the Vatican Bank. Through Helmut, Rico, as he is now called, is introduced to the glittering world of the Della Valles at their magnificent estate, Via Sorelia, and to the exclusive circle of international financiers and power brokers known as the Impero, who work secretly with the maestro to manage and expand the Holy See's vast wealth. This financial empire is Guido's primary focus. In the aftermath of the war, he sees an unprecedented opportunity to rebuild not only Italy, but all of Europe, positioning the Church through its financial power as a dominant force in the New World Order. A key element in this plan is the Swiss windfall, a fortune in money and art acquired at the end of the war from a desperate German general in exchange for Vatican passports for fleeing Nazi officers. The Pope Profumi, haunted by his vision of a coming apostasy and the Church's dangerous entanglement with worldly power, refuses to sanction the maestro's ambitious plans, insisting they wait for a sign from God. The Vatican State Council, a powerful body of 5 cardinals who act as the Pope's chief governing advisors, sides with the maestro, giving him their tacit approval to proceed. This decision creates a deep, if unspoken, rift between the Pope and the temporal power structure of his own Vatican. As the years pass, Rico becomes an increasingly important figure. His compassion and efficiency at the work of Saint Raphael earn him the respect of his superiors. When the refugee crisis subsides, he is given a new, highly sensitive assignment. As part of a secret team, he begins traveling extensively throughout the Soviet-controlled countries of Eastern Europe, assessing the grim state of the Church under communist persecution and establishing a clandestine network of informants and agents. These missions are perilous and grueling, exposing him to the brutal reality of the godless regimes and the heroic faith of the persecuted clergy and laity. He develops a profound admiration for men like the indomitable Cardinal Walensky of Poland, who teaches him the art of fighting communism not with martyrdom, but with cunning, patience, and unwavering moral resistance. This work hardens Rico, deepens his faith, and gives him an unparalleled expertise in the complex affairs of the Eastern Bloc. By 1958, Pope Profumi's health is failing. The pre-conclave maneuvering begins, and the cardinals, seeking a period of peace and transition, elect the jovial, 75-year-old Patriarch of Venice, Giovanni Angelica. Known for his peasant piety and his immense love for people, Papa Angelica is seen as a pastoral, interim pope who will not rock the boat. Within 3 months of his election, however, he stuns the world by announcing his intention to convene a Second Vatican Ecumenical Council. His dream is for a new Pentecost, a great spiritual renewal that will open the Church's windows to the modern world and unite all Christians in a spirit of love. This announcement electrifies a coalition of progressive and anti-Roman forces, both inside and outside the Church, known as the Northern Alliance. This group, which includes influential prelates like Annibale Sugnini and is secretly supported by Soviet intelligence, sees the council as the perfect opportunity to dismantle the centralized authoritarian structure of the Roman Church. As the council opens in 1962, it quickly escapes the control of the Roman Curia. Led by a cadre of influential Northern European bishops and their expert theologians, periti, the Council Fathers reject the carefully prepared traditional documents, schemata, and begin a radical rewriting of church teaching and practice, all under the banner of updating and renewal. Papa Angelica, trustful of the Holy Spirit's guidance, allows the process to unfold, unaware that he has unleashed forces that threaten the very foundations of the faith. The years following Vatican II are a time of unprecedented turmoil. A wave of liturgical experimentation, doctrinal confusion, and moral laxity sweeps through the Church. Priests and nuns abandon their vocations in droves, and the faith of millions is shaken. In Latin America, a new and dangerous liberation theology, secretly conceived in Moscow and championed by a charismatic Jesuit, Father Jaime Herreras, begins to fuse Catholic doctrine with Marxist revolution. Pope Angelica, his health now failing from an undisclosed cancer, dies in 1963. His dream of a new Pentecost turned into a nightmare of chaos and dissension. The ensuing conclave, deeply divided and fearful, elects a compromise candidate. The owlish, intellectual, and deeply ambitious former Vatican official, Giovanni da Brescia. Papa da Brescia, a man whose soul is a complex mixture of tender compassion and a cold structuralist vision, sees himself as the true heir of Vatican II's spirit. He is determined to complete the liberation of the Church from its rigid Romanism. He immediately begins a wholesale restructuring of the Vatican, replacing the old guard with his own international team of modern-minded prelates, including the arrogant French Cardinal John Levesque as his Secretary of State and the duplicitous Annibale Sugnini, whom he places in charge of liturgical reform. Da Brescia's pontificate becomes a battlefield. On one side are the Pope and his reformers, pushing for ever greater decentralization and change. On the other stands the Roman Curia, led by the Maestro and the State Council, fighting a desperate rearguard action to preserve the traditional structure and authority of the papacy. In this struggle, Rico Lansing, now a bishop and a secret cardinal, in pectore, becomes a pivotal figure, his covert network in the East providing the only reliable intelligence in a Vatican riddled with hostile agents and conflicting loyalties. The war for the soul of the Church is mirrored by a shadowy war in the world of finance. The Maestro and his impero find themselves in a deadly struggle with a new amoral financial superman, Paolo Lercani. A Sicilian of humble origins, with deep ties to the mafia, Lercani has built a vast, corrupt empire. Through his cunning and his connection with da Brescia, he gains access to Vatican funds, which he uses to finance a web of international crime, including drug trafficking, arms dealing, and political terrorism. The Maestro, realizing that Lercani is part of a much larger conspiracy, Brandolini's P2 theory, aimed at global destabilization, launches a counter-offensive. The financial war is ruthless, culminating in the collapse of Lercani's empire and the ritualistic murder of his key associate, Roberto Gonella, on Blackfriars Bridge in London. The scandal is immense, and although the Maestro manages to contain the damage to the Holy See, the affair proves to be the last straw for the ailing and beleaguered Papa da Brescia. His grand vision for a second spring has withered into a winter of decay. His health broken and his will paralyzed, he dies in 1978, a tragic figure, who, in trying to remake the Church, nearly presided over its dissolution. The conclave that follows is the most critical in modern history. The cardinal electors are starkly divided between two factions. One, led by the progressive English Cardinal Buff, champions the continued decentralization and democratization of the Church. The other, the traditionalist Roman party, knows that such a course would mean the final victory of the Church's enemies. Their candidate is a surprise to many, the Polish Cardinal Bogdan Waleska, a man forged in the crucible of communist persecution, a philosopher, mystic, and charismatic leader of immense strength. The maestro throws his full weight behind Waleska, but the conclave is deadlocked. The balance of power is held by the uncommitted cardinals. It is Rico Lansing who, in a dramatic and unforeseen turn of events, is called upon to speak. He delivers a powerful, impassioned address, rejecting the false dichotomy presented by the two factions. He reveals the existence of the secret bargain between the Vatican and the forces of international finance, tearing the document to pieces before the stunned cardinals. He declares that the Church's only true power is spiritual and moral, not political or financial. He calls for an end to all worldly compromises and a return to the core mission of Christ. His speech is so compelling, so filled with the fire of authentic faith, that it breaks the deadlock. The cardinals see in him the leader they need. The white smoke rises from the Sistine Chapel chimney. From the central balcony of St. Peter's Square, the announcement rings out across the square and to the world. We have a pope, the most eminent Lord Richard Cardinal Richard Lansing. The obscure American priest who arrived in Rome as a humble apprentice more than 30 years ago has become the vicar of Christ, inheriting a church in turmoil and a world on the brink, armed only with the conviction that the only power that can save them is not of this world.